Welcome back to Tech Vets, the podcast, and we are speaking to Ben Shorter from Ex Mil Recruitment. How are you, Ben?
Oh, I'm absolutely awesome, thank you. How about yourself?
Yeah, very well, thank you. And I love your t-shirt.
I'm a massive geek, so I thought I would represent. Okay. It's quite funny that sometimes when I got involved in recruitment, particularly IT recruitment, you would see like non-geeky people, and then the industry really started to move. So more and more people would turn up in Marvel t-shirts, talk about gaming at the weekend. And I think that is what IT recruitment is very much now like. So yeah, I thought I'd show off my love for Marvel.
So, just for the listeners, describe your t-shirt.
So it is a comic book Marvel T-shirt with different pictures from various comics over the last 50 years, wrapped around the T-shirt, basically.
It is absolutely fantastic. And talking about superheroes, working with ex-military, how did you get into working in ex-military recruitment?
I was quite lucky in some ways. So my dad had a recruitment agency when I was very young. And at one point, they had an ex-military team that was all run by veterans. So I managed to do some work experience there. Really enjoyed it. Was deciding what I wanted to do, and then went to uni. And after uni, decided to get into recruitment. And it was really funny. Like when you start in recruitment, everyone tells you how hard it is. You need to be resilient. You're going to face lots of rejection. My best friend was EOD in search, so he was out in Afghan. I thought my job's really easy, like compared to what you're doing. And so, as a result of having friends serve, family serve, I was all and equally like working for a veteran agency when I was very young. I've always had a penchant to work with veterans. I've always enjoyed it. I've always represented it in any place that I worked. I see the real positive attributes of people that serve. I love it. Absolutely love it.
Did you ever think about joining the forces yourself?
100%. So I don't really talk about it that much. It's like, well, if someone told me they thought about being a recruiter when they were very younger, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I did. It was why I ended up working for my dad's agency, because he wanted me to understand more about the military. I think from the age of 14 to about 20, I was really, really considering it.
What made you decide to follow the family business?
So I think it's quite funny actually. I never worked for my dad. So although I went into recruitment, I told him specifically that I would never work for him in his business. So I went and did my own thing. But I realized at one point during university that I wanted a career that could be lucrative, and I was sold the dream with recruitment. So I thought I would go into that. And I also learned firsthand from seeing successful recruiters that you can do very well while still being very ethical. It's what I liked about the industry.
That's really an interesting point that you make, because I think there's quite a lot of talk in the industry about recruiters being unethical and promising the world both to employers and to candidates and failing to deliver. What's your experience of it?
Oh, 100%. I've worked with, so throughout most of my career, I've worked with bigger agencies, smaller agencies, and agencies like Ex Mil, which I get to manage. And I've seen a full range of people. I've seen people that were extremely unethical. I've seen people outright lie to candidates or do all sorts of things. I think the marketplace has definitely shifted over the last 10 years. So back in the like 2009, 10, 11, 12, when I was started, you probably saw 50% of people act in really unethical ways. Whereas I think with the rise of social media, people can't get away with stuff like they used to. So the industry did become more ethical. But still, you do see things that make me cringe on quite a regular basis. It's why I'm really glad that I work in an environment where all of the team are driven by high standards, and most of that is to do with most of my team served. So I think there is a big correlation between people that served and the level of standards that are in that organisation.
How did you come to meet the people that are ex-services who now work with you?
Range of reasons. It's quite funny actually. One of the consultants that now works with me, he served in the Marines for 22 years, was decided to relocate overseas with his family after leaving service. And he was speaking to me about overseas contracting, about what I can pick up a gig, do 6 months in Africa, the Middle East, and then go home for 6 months. And I said, well, you can work for me remotely if you want, Dan. Do you want to have a conversation about that? And I think this is the thing throughout the interview process. He was someone that I was thinking about representing to one of my overseas clients. I realized that he was the type of person that I'd love to have within the team. So yeah, I mean, sometimes it can happen as organically as that. Obviously, the founder of Ex Mil, where he served for 10 years, and then Ex Mil have been established since 2005, where we have very open and honest conversations with candidates. Sometimes we will see something that maybe they haven't thought about that we have, including working for us.
That's really interesting, because I think no one probably expects to get in touch with a recruiter and be offered a job in recruitment. What was it? I mean, you mentioned that you've got quite a lot of Ex Mil staff now. What was it about their characters or their experience that lent themselves to the role of recruitment?
I think it's the ability to learn things quickly. And also, and this is where recruitment does have a habit of going wrong. In general, people like me are brought into the industry really young. We're put in a room with 10 or so other similar people and almost shown, okay, here's a way of succeeding, but go and figure it out. So, for example, when I first started to work in warehouse recruitment, I had no real idea about what happened in warehouses. I had to go and learn that. Whereas the fact that I've got someone who understands what it's like to serve, it means it's so much easier for them to speak to candidates. And also because of the diversity of roles that you have during service, where you do a new posting every 2 years, you learn a new trade, or you have to learn things at the drop of a hat, just really lends well to recruitment, that ability to understand an industry, sometimes from a point where you've already worked in that role, and then you're able to give clients better feedback. Like, it's quite funny. I was talking to a client who wanted some RF engineers, and I got one of my consultants, Warren, on the call. And he said to me, what does Warren know about RF engineering? I said, don't be harsh, Ashley, but more than you do. He was in the Royal Signals for 25 years. He knows a lot about RF engineering and has worked on equipment that you don't even realize exists. So I think as a result of all the commercial experience that veterans and service leavers get, it opens up a real range of roles for them, whether that's recruitment, whether that's often stuff they don't think about. And this is probably where I'm going to go into my little high horse of why I love working with veterans. Veterans often don't realise the level of skill or character that's involved in being a veteran. Like when you asked me, did I ever think about it? I did, but I don't talk about it that much because I never did it. I also know that if you thought about joining up and you did, and then you passed basic training, and then you served for 4 years, then 12 years, and then the next time you're on 22 years, you've got a level of commitment and a level of skill that is really valuable to different employers. You come from a culture where, okay, here's a £10,000 piece of equipment. You're going to go into a room, watch someone do a PowerPoint for 30 minutes, and then there you go, there's a £10,000 piece of equipment, figure it out, can't use it. And I think, and I think this is the thing, like Meredith, like when I talk about that type of story, that's something that my friend would have told me early on in his career. I've been put in here. I now know how to make explosives. It's like, wow, that's something that's pretty different, Stan. And I think this is the thing, like in the military, because you're around everyone doing the same, you forget that your skills are very, very different and can empower you to have a very positive career. Versus like my first recruitment role was basically placing into security teams, into NATO contracts, working for my dad and his friends. And I would arrange an interview in some location in the world and the person would be there. And then I went to uni, was in warehouse recruitment, and getting someone to actually turn up for work on time was probably the biggest challenge that I had. Not something you really have when you work with veterans.
Why do you think, or how do you help the veterans that you work with to see their value and worth?
I think firstly it's about understanding what it is that they want and how the commercial world has opportunities that's relevant for them. And then secondly, it's often, again, where I've spoke to thousands of veterans, I understand that if someone's senior non-commissioned officer in EAD and search, they're going to be able to add lots of value into anything that relates to risk. So they could go into insurance. If someone is senior within the Royal Signals, they're going to understand a massive range of technologies from radio frequencies all the way to networks. If someone's been in the Royal Marines, then they've literally been in an environment where standards have been up to here for their entire career. And I think it's understanding, for us as a recruiters, understanding the key skills that a veteran's going to have, and then saying to them, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? It's why I always prefer to take individuals on that have served, or if they haven't served, they really understand what individuals that are serving go through.
When you're working specifically in tech, but say you get you could get anyone come to you who's ex-military, who probably doesn't see themselves as a tech person or someone who could work in tech. What skills do you look for, and how do you encourage them to realize that they absolutely could get a job in tech?
I think it's one of the things, isn't it? Like, as much as people serving can have banter about equipment that they get used to, the reality is the British military is extremely tech driven, whether it's UAVs, radio equipment, to different levels of weaponry used within the Navy. So people forget that they have probably more of an understanding of wider tech than your average layperson, because of the equipment that you're using, because of the people that you're around. And it's also remembering that there's a lot of roles within tech that aren't necessarily tech roles. So, for example, one of my best friends was a salesperson. I saw actually Josh at one point from Trident talking about roles in tech sales. There's such a big area there where you need to be passionate about tech, but no one's going to. People might ask me to find a network engineer. No one's going to ask me to build a network for them. And I know what books to read. I might be able to give it a go, but ultimately my role isn't to understand networks. It's to understand what makes a good network engineer and interview someone accordingly. So I think, don't remember that there is such a wide range of roles in tech, and because roles are changing all the time, that sometimes what happened, someone with 20 years experience, that experience could be still out of date quite quickly within a couple of years because of how tech moves. So as a result, there's always new chances to get involved in the industry.
With service leavers, are you seeing any trends evolve in the HR people that are coming to you asking for specific roles? Do you see a kind of influx of requests coming in on cybersecurity or aspects of tech, or is it all pretty broad?
So we're as an agency, we're very broad, and it often relates to where our consultants go and almost pitch for business. But what, again, I think sometimes service leavers forget, if you look at companies that sell tech, one of the biggest markets for selling tech is government and defence. And as a result, it means there's a ton of opportunities open for people that they don't realise. So as an example, say a company is selling a cybersecurity solution into the MOD, they need people with security clearance. And most people do not have security clearance. And ultimately, if an employer wants to make things as easy as possible, so they'll say, oh, look, I could put someone through security clearance, but I don't know whether they're going to pass, fail. It's going to take 3, 4, 5 months for me to get an answer. Or I could take someone who's already got security clearance and that have already been through that process. They've already passed that process. And I'm therefore going to pick the person with security clearance. I think it's something I personally deal with a lot. So I work with security clearance and developed vetting very frequently. And I think this is the thing, isn't it? Like, most people would expect that the highest salary that I would have placed would have been a WA1 or an officer, whereas in fact, it's a corporal from the Royal Signals who's doing a contract role for me on a long-term contract in government, getting paid a lot more money than when he was serving. And that's something I'm really proud of and I love. I love being able to take someone from the military and get them opportunities that they might not have been able to think about, or they don't know how to get involved in that sector.
How did that corporal react when he got a job that was paying far more than what he was used to?
I mean, he was, yeah. There was that debate of who owes who a drink, and the reality is, like, and this is what people forget, right? He's gone into a contract position, so most people will sometimes shut the door at contract roles, not realizing that there is a lot to be gained within that world. So he was quite open to that, and we were very honest about both the highs and lows of contracting, but effectively he's on a 1-year contract getting paid £435 a day when he was a corporal in the military 4 months ago.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. And I guess, is there potential for that contract to extend beyond a year?
100%. Like, Meredith, one of my friends, has been contracting for Fujitsu, so he was ex-Roll Signals. He's been in the contract role for Fujitsu on the same day rate for the last 8 years.
Oh my gosh.
And these things happen quite a lot within the defence ecosystem.
Talking about contracts is something that we actually haven't talked about much before, because many people, when they sign off, they're looking for stability for their family. They're looking for, they have that fear because they're so used to having a consistent wage at the end of every month. So probably to a lot of service leavers, if you said, contract work, they'd probably be really nervous, quite understandably nervous about taking that straight off the bat. But what would you say to a service leaver who was kind of anti-contract work initially?
I think it's the thing, it's showing people the opportunity. So next year we were talking about it internally, running a monthly webinar about it, or bi-monthly webinar, because contracting can be a tough world. There are lots of risks attached to contracting. There's also lots of upsides. So at the moment, I've got a contract role at the moment that would be suitable for someone coming from the signals, who really has a core understanding of RF. They would earn £60,000 in 6 months. So there are these things out there, and I think it's also understanding, and this is me being quite honest, most people have 2, maybe 3 roles in their first 5 years since leaving the military. So that's something I've seen quite a lot, where they will go into a big consultancy, maybe realize that they no longer wanted to work into a big organization, and then move to a smaller one. So I see a lot of veterans change jobs in their first 2 to 3 years post-military service, because they're looking for something that was maybe more similar to the military than they realized, or less similar to the military than they realized. So the way I see it is, contracting is a great way to do something that's going to last 6 months to a year without it being a negative in terms of your CV, because contracts come to an end. Whereas if you've had 2 permanent roles in the first 12 months of military service, some employers might be a little bit negative towards it. I mean, personally, I would never worry about it. I'd never judge someone for leaving their first couple of roles in Civvy Street, just because it's going to be very, very different to what they used to.
How do you find employers react to ex-military? Because there's quite a lot of stigma attached to ex-military. Like, they come with baggage, they come with PTSD, they're a box of frogs, they're either kind of mad, sad, or something else. I can't remember what the third one is. Mad, sad, or bad. That's it. It all rhymes. Do you ever come across that attitude, or do you think it's changed, or do you think it's fair to say that some do have that attitude towards ex-mil?
Yeah, I think it has changed. Now, there are going to be people that think that just because they watched a Carry On film in the 70s, that all RSMs are really shouty. It's not the case. Like, being a shouty RSM doesn't really work anymore. So there are people that I had it recently. I put out a post about it. When it comes to around either Remembrance Day or Armed Forces Day, we get loads of inquiries, and these inquiries can be random. And I was talking to a care home about military leavers because they were like, oh yeah, we saw everything on the news about military leavers. It'd be great to attract them, but our jobs are paying £11 an hour. I'm like, that's less than what someone gets in their first year of being in the military. I'm not sure if you can attract the right people. And then sometimes I will come across it. Like I was out for dinner and someone said to me, well, it must be really good, like helping people with PTSD. I'm like, people in the military, they might have all sorts of stories. And obviously, if you've been in Afghan, you could have a degree of trauma. Most people that I work with that are veterans are the top percentage of people that I've worked with because of all the characteristics, regardless of what they've seen or heard or done in their military service, because there's all these soft skills. So I think that there are some companies that are a bit old school, but there's also lots of companies that are quite modern in terms of their thinking. Like we watched their documentary on Commandos. Looks like they get like these people are phenomenal. How do we find them? I think there's going to be more of that, particularly with what people like Tech Vets and James are doing, or all the different charities. What they're doing with the Veterans Office. Like, there's so many things out there really pushing the narrative that, look, veterans are really good in work. Go and make sure they work well in your business, treat them well, and you'll have a team of superstars.
What's the difference? Do you place non-military as well within?
Not anymore. That is the best thing about what I do now, Meredith. I say it's without a shadow of doubt. Like, to give you an example, I use an app called Calendarly for people to book calls with me. I have a 97% show-up rate. One of my friends who still works for a commercial recruiter has like a 45% show-up rate. I would never go back to working in civilian recruitment again because I've loved my time with Ex Mil. I absolutely love it.
Wow. What's are there any people that stick in your head who you've helped that you kind of, I don't know, their story just stayed with you, or you feel like, you know, you made a difference for them?
I think, and that's where I probably am a bit lucky. I think that our team, where we speak to 100 veterans every week, there's probably a couple of those stories every week where maybe someone's been in a tight spot and we've had like, again, it's a bit weird, but sometimes we get like residential caretaker roles that have accommodation, which is where I then go and I'll speak to people like Walking with the Wounded and say, look, I've got a role that has accommodation included. Do we know anyone who's really struggling that could really benefit from that? So we do have those types of situations where maybe someone has been homeless and we've been able to support them into a role that provides accommodation. I've seen a ton of people change careers. So while I might talk about things like the Royal Signals going into cyber, I know people that came to me as sappers and said, Ben, how do I get into cyber? And then I had the conversation with them. Often Tech Vets are one of the first people that I signpost people to, like, look, go and check out all of these free courses here, look at this, this, and this. And then a year later, they're working for a consultancy in cyber. So I love it. And I think that is one of my favorite parts about the job, that there are a ton of people that we've been able to maybe open their eyes to roles that they didn't really realize existed, or companies that maybe it wasn't the best opportunity on paper, but we knew that the company were a good company, and suddenly the person's got 2 promotions in their first year.
That's really interesting, because there are so many recruiters out there, and it's such a minefield for service leavers because they're directed, you know, there isn't a kind of, well, there's meant to be a single point where people get directed during resettlement, but there isn't really. And I think for a lot of people, just, you can start Googling military recruitment and you're just kind of overwhelmed. What would be your kind of best tip for people who want to genuinely find a role that's going to be lasting, that's going to suit them? Where do they start, apart from coming obviously to you?
Yeah, I think ironically, starting with us isn't going to be the first thing. Look, if you ask me, where does the most success come in finding a great job? It's all through networking. get onto LinkedIn, build a profile, network with all your old oppos, people that you served under, people that served under you, build as many relationships as possible, go to as many face-to-face ex-military careers events as you can, whether that's the CTP, BFRS, Forces Transition Group. The more people you're out there and speaking to, the more you're going to find what opportunities are real for you. And look, the reality is recruiters are going to be there to try and sometimes sell you a bit of a pipe dream. Like, I would love to say that we don't do it as Ex Mil, and I'll also say quite openly that the veteran recruitment space is filled with a ton of people, ton of recruiters that are really good at their job, whether that's Trident Search, whether that's Hire a Veteran, Hire Cracker. Look at veterans, because they'll often be a bit more honest with you than your standard civvies, and just network with as many people as possible, because you can then ask them the hard questions of what's it like to work there? What's the positive side? What's the negative side? There's a certain big company, I won't mention them by name, that are known for recruiting veterans. And when people ask me about it, I'm really honest. I'm like, look, 50% of people are moaning about the hours, and the other 50% of people are absolutely loving it there. So don't take everything as gospel, and figure out, but speak to enough people and then figure out what feeling gives you the best feeling, and go for that.
That's really good advice. And when you mentioned before about directing people to tech vets training, in the skills gap that you see from HR coming to you and asking for, are there any kind of tech or cyber skills that you would say to someone, hey, look, tech vets offer this training, go and get this done because this is where the market's going, or this is the skill set that's in demand?
I think it really varies down to what the individual wants. Now, one thing I had a call with a training company recently about similar to this. For me, there's a lot of big, high-paying CCNA roles that are suitable for someone with a tech background, even the military, who's got DV.
What's the CCNA role?
Networking, so Cisco networking.
Okay.
So it is something that I know tech vets don't necessarily offer the courses, but there's a ton of networking type things out there. Cybersecurity is very in trend at the moment. It's very much like there's loads of opportunities in cyber, but there's obviously a ton of them. Networking is something that is an industry that will only grow. Obviously, more and more people are using the internet, use more stuff on the internet. Therefore, networks have to change their capacities all the time. And as a result of that, there's always going to be opportunities in network engineering, because it's specialist enough that not everyone goes into it, but it's not the same as being a software engineer. So it's often following a process.
And would you say it is the kind of Cisco networking career path that is the main one that people are looking for?
I think that Cisco is heavily used within government and defence, which is one of the reasons why CCNA as a course is one of the things that I come across very frequently. I do think it's good to understand other non-Cisco systems as well. And again, this is what's great about tech vets. And it's why I like, when tech vets really started to gain popularity a couple of years ago, like, we were known for sending as many people your way as possible, but it's because of the plethora of things. You can go down and think, okay, I'm gonna have a look at a networking course. Oh, I've been doing it for a couple of hours, it's not really for me. Why don't I try service desk? Okay, that's something that maybe is more for me. I like following that process. Or what about government governance and compliance? I think this is the thing. By going to people like yourselves, you can really figure out what is for you and what's not for you.
That's a really good tip. And that's something that I guess we do say to a lot of people: just dip your toe in to the foundations and see where you want to go from there, because there's so many courses on offer now through tech vets that it can be quite overwhelming. But I guess from what you're saying, that if the industry is growing towards network engineering, then Cisco isn't a bad place to dip your toe in and start from.
It's definitely one of them, but even your basic service desk courses, there's only going to be more companies selling IT solutions. So understanding how to get involved in service desk is a good entry point for people. If you're already from a technical background, look at things like service management or service architecture, because there's going to be a ton of roles out there that, again, can sometimes be extremely high paying. And they often, and I think this is the thing, like, while as a business we'll ask people what their background is, what their rank is, what regiments they served in, it's because we understand, okay, at this level you're going to be doing different things to this level or this level. But look at where your experience is transferable. So obviously not everyone can take that jump to being a non-techie, to being a highly paid network engineer. But you can reverse engineer whatever you want. So say, for example, it's what I did. I knew that I wanted to run a recruitment business. So to run a recruitment business, I need to obviously understand recruitment. But I also need to understand the legal side of recruitment and how to be compliant in different areas you trade in. So I made sure that one of the businesses I worked in, I was involved in the operations team. So I did less day-to-day recruitment, but I got to understand the legal side, the finance side. So what I did was say, okay, this is where I want to be. These are all the things that I need to cover to get here. Let's build myself a little ladder. So what I would do if I was in the militaries now, I would think, okay, this is roughly when I'm going to leave. So these are the things I'm going to do before leaving, so that when I leave, I can then build myself a little ladder to take me to the career route that I want in the quickest possible way.
That is a really good tip to build your ladder. For those who, I mean, as part of building that ladder when people leave, how important is a CV these days?
A CV will get you into an interview, so you need to have one to get in front of the right people. But also, sometimes CVs can be subverted through networking. So I think having a good CV is always handy. Like, even being in the managing director position in Ex Mil, I make sure my CV is kept up to date because anything can happen. But
that's very doom and gloom.
Well, I think this is the thing though. Like, I've been in situations where I thought a job would last a long time, and maybe there was redundancies. Maybe I ended up working under a boss that went from working under a boss that I loved to a boss that I didn't like. So I think it's quite funny. Like, doom and gloom. I'm one of those like plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, like all the way into like Roman numerals. You've always got to have some sort of backup. And as a result, I think of having that. Like, my CV is one of the things that I've always got ready just in case. So I think it is good to have, and it's good to do it properly. And the problem, though, with understanding how to do a CV properly is everyone's got a different idea about what good is. So that's the other thing to bear in mind with CVs. Everyone's going to tell you it should look like this. You should be, Ben, I'm really struggling to fit my CV onto 2 pages. Like, you're a warrant officer. You've done like a ton of jobs over the last 22 years. Why are you trying to fit into 2 pages? So I think, yeah, don't do a good CV, but don't get over bogged down and don't overthink it. And the most important thing about a CV, and this is, again, me being a cheeky recruiter and understanding how to cheat the system. I've got a job spec that I want to apply for. When building my CV, I basically transfer as much of that job spec into my CV. So whoever's reading my CV thinks, wow, that really matches my job spec.
Is something that people do get wrapped around the axle with, because you always hear that, you know, your CV should be 1 page, it should be 2 pages, it should be 4, you know, not necessarily 4 pages at all, or you should have a link to your portfolio, or you should have X, Y, and Z. And it's a real minefield for people, because then sometimes you don't even have to upload a CV, you have to do an online form, and then the CV doesn't fit in it. And it's just like, you know, it's almost, you know, traumatic at the point of just applying for the job, let alone getting to the interview stage. Do you guys provide any training when it comes to those initial rounds, or knowing what you need to do just to get your foot in the door?
Yeah, so I actually run an online course every month around job searching. So within that, I talk about where I would look for work. So all the different job fairs, Armed Forces Covenant, then talk about CVs, then talk about networking.
And how do people sign up for that?
So I promote it on LinkedIn. In fact, I did a post about it today. So you'll see it on Ex Mil's LinkedIn page, on events every month. Barring August, we do a job search webinar and then a interview webinar. Now with us, like, while my two consultants are like the opposite in how they work, one of them just loves helping people. So if you're really, really struggling, speak to me. I'll put you in a call with Warren, and Woz will sort your CV out.
Does the other one not like helping people then?
He likes helping people, but he's also got a long old list of jobs that I need him to find candidates for.
That's brilliant. Okay, so you don't want Warren when you phone up for help.
No, you want Warren. What was
You
is the
want
one? Yeah, what was is the one that will help you with your CV. It will sit in his own time and give you a list of companies in your local area that you should apply for, because he will do all the searching with you.
Okay.
And
And who should you avoid?
well, it's not who you should avoid. I've got Dan, my ex-Royal Marine, who literally is. There's his list of jobs. So Dan's very good at placing people. So what Dan will do is, if you call him, he won't necessarily spend ages on your CV. What he will do is say, here's a webinar that we run, here's a couple of templates that we use. But he will keep an eye out for, if you say to him, okay, this is where I live, Dan will always have it registered in the back of his head, so that when an opportunity comes up 6 weeks down the line, he'll be like, here's a job for you.
Brilliant. That sounds like a pretty good tag team.
100%. I think that's why I feel really lucky that I do have a bit of a dream team where all of my team work together. So we've got a list of all of our jobs that Ex Mil are working on at any one time. So like, if I'm looking for a network engineer, everyone knows about it. But also we have slightly different things that we're good at. So I'm good at doing all the stuff on social media and building that sort of influencer candidate attraction. Woz is great at helping people. Dan's great at placing people. They work slightly different industries though. So again, as a team, we just focus on trying to place as many people as we can, but also to help as many as we can.
That sounds like a place that our veterans should be calling into after they've completed their certifications and training.
Yeah. And this is the thing, even like if people are going through stuff, or it's one thing, someone said to me, Ben, when's the best time to speak to Ex Mil? You can speak to us whenever the hell you want. If you've got 5 years left of service, you can speak to us to get an idea of what the market could be like in 5 years' time. If you left in the 90s or early 2000s, you can speak to us, we'll still help you. Like, our team are focused on helping veterans. So to be involved in my team, you can't necessarily be like I was as a 21-year-old. As a 21-year-old, I got into recruitment to earn commission. Ex Mil is not that place for people. What we do is, you're a team that has to be passionate about supporting the community and going above and beyond for people. Like when you say to me, Ben, do you want to jump on a call at 8 o'clock to do a podcast for Tech Vets? I'm loving this. Even though I'm now into, I think, my 12th hour of work. And no doubt I'll go and do some stuff after this as well.
Well, it's brilliant to hear. And for people who are listening, how do they get in touch with you? They can obviously contact you all hours, and I'm sure if anyone's listening wants to call you at 2 a.m, you should do, just to prove what you've just said. But what are the best means of getting in touch?
Yeah, so I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can email anyone at the Ex Mil team. So my email address is ben@ex-mil.co.uk. Replace Ben with Warren, Dan, JC, or Liz. You can find us on the Ex Mil website. If someone applies to one of our jobs, it goes to whatever consultant's dealing with it, and our consultants are basically told that if someone applies, that they have to respond. And even if it's to say, look, unfortunately, your CV is not right for this job, we do. You can also approach me on LinkedIn, and I'm very good at like systemizing things. So we've got Calendly links. I can send you a link, and you can book a call directly into whatever team member is best to support you.
That sounds brilliant, and I'm sure that any listeners will be reaching out to you to
Of course.
And
one thing I'll say quite openly, again, just as a team of recruiters, what can happen in recruitment is that suddenly we get inundated with a ton of messages at once. So while my team, they're way better than I am, occasionally I will miss a message. So what I would always say is, if you don't get an actual response, just send a follow-up message within a week or so. And if it happens a couple of times, reach out to someone else in the team, and whoever's missed it usually gets a bit of a beast in.
Is that by Dan?
Exactly. Well, he's a Royal Marine, so he's got to be the one who's leading any beastings within the team. I shouldn't say that actually, because was started in the para regiment, so there is obviously the para marine rivalry that goes on between the two of them.
Yeah, so no one's getting beasted for anything. We'll just no, that's brilliant, and thank you so much, Ben, for talking to us tonight. And I think it's really good because we often talk to people who are very focused on specific fields of tech, and actually it's really important for us to go back to the roots of that journey from signing off, understanding the ladder and the steps that you need to take to get where you want to be, and understanding where you want to be. So your advice has been really useful, and for anyone listening, the links to Ex Mil Recruitment and some of the webinars that Ben has mentioned will be in the description of the podcast. So just click on those and you'll be able to reach out to Ben and his team for more information. But thank you, Ben, for joining us this evening.
I've loved it. Thank you so much for having me on.